Hi, this is Steve from PixelBump.com. Welcome to our new tutorial on digital blood. Not necessarily because you need to have blood and gore to have a good horror movie, but they do seem to go hand in hand.
Fix on this motherfucker!
So, let's take a look at how we're going to make this. I'm going to start today by using RealFlow. And RealFlow is kind of the de facto liquid simulator. And if you've never used RealFlow before, don't run for the door. It's not going to be that scary, and I think you're going to find it's a very friendly piece of software that you can get up and running with very quickly. So the first thing we do is we are presented with our project management screen. Right here in the location, I'm going to be saving it to my RealFlow tests. If you wanted to go to a different location, you can click over here, browse for a folder, and I'm going to name this one Halloween Blood. Oop. 2 L's. Very important. Alright, so now we've got a project. And you can set up RealFlow to tumble and pan just like your favorite 3D application. Right now I have mine set up to work with Maya hotkeys, but you can set it up to work with, I believe, Maya, 3ds Max, Softimage, and Lightwave. And the first thing we're going to need to do is look at our scene scale. Again, this is a dynamic simulation, and you're going to want the physics to be somewhat in the ballpark of what you're looking for so you can get a really nice realistic motion. If that's what you're going for. If you're looking for something completely unrealistic, then don't worry about it. So in RealFlow, each one of these squares is a 1 meter by 1 meter square. So meter on this side, etc. And if we put in a new emitter by coming up to our menu here, we'll choose a circle emitter, we're going to see that basically this is a 3 foot across emitter. That's pretty big. That's, big pipe. And we necessarily don't want that to be our big pipe. So let's go ahead and get a reference object in here. And I'm going to go ahead and create a cube. And this cube is also, if we just line it up here, a meter by a meter by a meter. And that is not going to be great for blood type stuff unless you're looking to do The Shining and the blood is coming out of the elevator. So we're going to click down here with a little wrench and arrow, and that's going to bring up our scale options. And what we want to do is come in here and take a look at our geometry scale. So if we go smaller, we'll see that our little guy here, our cube, is now much smaller. It is maybe a foot across at best. And if we go larger, we'll see that now our scene scale has changed quite dramatically, and now instead of being 1 meter from here to here, we've got a meter from here to here, which is rendering this at maybe a foot across for our emitter. And that's probably a little too big as well, so let's go ahead and go something like 15 for our scene scale. And that's going to make our emitter around the size of something that a human wound could conceivably be. And I'm going to go ahead and rotate my emitter. And if I come over here to my node parameters, you'll see that we have position, rotation, scale, shear, all sorts of very common parameters. And I'm going to just go ahead and type in -90 to get it straight on. And I'm just going to go ahead and click the simulate button. And the water is just going to kind of go out forever, creating a very... no. Let's not comment on that part of what it looks like. And the reason that we're getting that is because there's no gravity in the scene. Gravity is a part of the daemon menu. And if I come in here And look down, we've got things like kill volume, kill age, kill speed, kill collisions, kill spheres, and gravity, plus a lot of other things, a lot of different interactions for your liquids. So let's go ahead and just drop a gravity in real quick. And under the display, I'm just going to turn it to turn the icon off. I just don't want to see it in my scene. And you can see that down here in the relationship editor, the circle emitter and the gravity have been connected. So we should see the gravity affecting the particles at this time. So let's go ahead and simulate again. And there we go. Now we've got it moving down a little more realistically. So let's go ahead and reset, and let's start taking a look at some of the parameters of our emitter. So here we have the type as being liquid, which is good. We can also change it over to things like dumb or elastics or gas, but for now we definitely want to keep it liquid. Resolution is something we're going to come back to later, and this is going to kind of set up the quality of the liquid when it comes time to making a mesh or rendering. The density of the liquid is just what it sounds like. It's how heavy it is. Since I want to do a kind of very watery, sprayy blood, I'm going to go ahead and reduce that down to 500. The internal pressure is how hard the water is trying to, the internal pressure is how hard the liquid is trying to push out from itself, and the external pressure is how much the air is trying to keep the water together. And I'm going to go ahead and just change the internal pressure to 0.8 and the external pressure to 0.6. The viscosity, I'm also going to drop down just to 2. Now, if you want to do something like a gel or a heavy oatmeal-y kind of viscous liquid, you'd want to go ahead and crank that number way, way up. Surface tension is, again, another way to keep the water from breaking up, but I'm not going to touch that right now. Down here in statistics, we can get all kinds of information about our liquid once it's simulating. Here in display, we can choose to turn the emitter off and on. We can choose what kind of detail, what kind of colors we want to see in the viewport. Nice visualization stuff. If you're using Maxwell Renderer, there's a whole menu here. We're not going to get into that today. And then down here at the bottom, we've got the speed and the random, which is what we really want to talk about right now. Right now the speed is at 2, and again, if I hit it, it's not moving very fast. So we're definitely going to want to take that up to at least something like maybe 10. And then the V and H random. These are two things that if I simulate a little bit, and then I come in, you can see that all of the particles are in these rings. And they're all very nice and neatly aligned along a grid. And that's not necessarily what we're going to want here. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe go to 0.5 and 0.5 here for my random. Let me reset and simulate it again. And you'll see a big difference. Now we've got a lot more breakup in that pattern. And that's going to help us just achieve a nicer, more realistic look right off the bat. So I'm going to hit reset again. And if I'm just simulating it out, again, nothing really exciting. We don't have anything happening to that fluid yet. But what I want to do is come in and add another effector, and I'm going to choose the noise field. And the noise field is really great. Think of it a lot like turbulence in either Cinema or Maya or 3ds Max. It's a way to push your particles around in a random way. And again, I'm going to come in, turn off my icon, and I'm just going to pick up my strength, and let's just go ahead and see what that's going to do right away. If I turn back over to the water, we can already see now it's having quite an effect on it over time. As the noise field goes to work, it's really giving us a nice breakup. But let's go ahead and come back to the noise field, and let's change its scale, the noise scale, down to something maybe a little smaller. See what that does. So you can see it's really affecting it. and pushing it in this one direction, you can kind of see the pattern of the noise. So I'm going to go ahead and say that's not what I want. I'm going to go ahead and, well, if we go up to something high like 10, let's go ahead and take a look at that. And now the noise is so small, you're really not seeing it as well. So somewhere around 1 was probably good for what we're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe go to 0.8. And for right now, the strength, I think, is looking okay. We may want to adjust that again later. And again, if I hit simulate, nothing really wrong with this yet. I think we're getting something kind of interesting. But it doesn't really look like a blood spurt or any kind of natural thing that you would get from a wound. So I'm going to go ahead and reset, and I'm going to show you my favorite thing to do with liquids, which is to use geometry to break it up. I think RealFlow looks so much better once it's bounced off a little geometry and got a chance to move in a more realistic way. I'm going to come in to my scale, and I'm just going to shrink it on down. And if I hit my scale key here, now I can just kind of adjust it for the end here. And what I want to do is get something somewhat thin but long and bring it up right over the emitter and pull it out a bit. And then I'm going to go ahead, duplicate it, and then I'm going to spin it 90 degrees. And what's going to happen is now the water is going to have to push through this little cross that I've set up. And if I hit simulate again, we can see now the liquid is starting to do something a lot more interesting. And that's looking a lot better already. So maybe what we should do is make these guys a little thinner. And let's go ahead and increase the speed on our emitter. And we'll come in and simulate again. That's better. We're getting a little more forward motion now. The geometry is not completely blocking the liquid's flow. So, we've got something starting to happen that's interesting. Now let's go ahead and animate a little bit of the properties here. So, I think about 5 frames in, I'm going to go ahead, right-click on my speed, and add a key. I'm going to go over to frame 6, and I'm just going to turn it off. And I'll add a key. And now if I go back and hit simulate, we've just got a nice big burst that comes out and dies off. Now there's a couple ways we can deal with the particles here as far as killing them off. We can either kill them by age, which I don't particularly like, or what we can do is decide about how big we want this thing to get, you know, how big our render view would be. You know, if this was something like a close-up, you know, the particles are over here. At what point do we not see them falling out of camera frame anymore? And what we can do is somewhere around there, come back to our effectors menu, our demons menu, and we'll grab a kill volume. And what the kill volume does is creates a box around the scene that says no particles can live outside of it. So right now I'm going to fit it to my scene because I know that in my close-up there, anything below that is going to be totally fine. I'm not going to mind if it falls out of frame and stops calculating those particles. And the fewer particles you have in the scene, obviously, the quicker it calculates. So this is something that really helps you save time in your simulations. So I'm going to go ahead, reset that one more time. And I think just to give me a little bit of buffer I'm going to pull it out a little bit more in the X and Z, and that should work pretty well for us as far as our volume. All right, so let's look at bringing our fluid up to a better resolution, because right now it's simulating very fast, but if we tried to mesh it or render it, it would be just little dots, because there's not enough particles to really create an interesting stream. So I'm going to come back to my particles, and I'm going to go up to a resolution of 30. And I'm going to come down to my timeline and say, I think we were in our mid-20s there, so let's say 48 frames, which is the equivalent of 2 seconds. So we'll say 48 frames, that's all we're going to need the simulation for. And we'll go ahead and hit simulate. And we're going to have a much slower simulation, but you can see the density of the particles is much, much higher now. And that's going to come out really nicely when we want to go and mesh them, because all these little single particles off on their own will probably get ignored, while the groups of particles are going to end up making the shape that we're really going to see. So I'm just going to let this simulate for a bit, and as soon as it's done, we'll come back and take a look. Okay, so we've got our 48 frames simulated here, and right now we've just got a big mass of particles happening. So let's kind of just go through it, and you can see this giant explosion of liquid. And if we want to see this kind of play in real time to judge the speed, we can come down here and do an OpenGL preview. There we go. It's got good, nice motion to it. Very happy with that. Let's take a look at how we're going to get this out to render. Well, the first thing we want to do is the first thing we should talk about is the different ways you can render something out of RealFlow. You can do it through the render kit, a standard legacy mesh, or you can do it with Krakatoa. We're not going to go into Krakatoa this time. That's going to be saved for something beyond the basic tutorial. And we're not going to go into the render kit. We're going to stick right now with a particle mesh that you can write out and then import into any 3D application with the RealFlow plugin. And that's how we'll show it today. So if I want to create a mesh, I need to click on my emitter and then click here on Particle Mesh Legacy. And this is the way RealFlow has done its outputs for about the entire length of the program. It's not necessarily the best way anymore, but it's a really good solid foundation that goes to a lot of places. So if I come into my mesh options, the first thing it's asking is, do I want to build it? Yes or no. What am I looking for? Am I looking for metaballs and polygons, clone objects? I want to stick with metaballs. And then the polygon size. And the polygon size is something that you're going to kind of have to feel out. And I'm going to start off with 0.1, which I know is going to be way too big. But I also want the first couple times I try to test this for it to move very fast and then kind of hone in on it. If you're waiting a minute or two just to see whether or not your mesh is looking all right, you're really slowing yourself down. Then I'm going to click on my circle, go into the field, and I'm going to give it a radius of maybe 0.05. I'm going to give it a very small radius. I don't want these little particles here to have enough attraction to pull the mesh way out here. I want the mesh to be very close to the particles. And I'm going to come down to the bottom and just click the Build Mesh button. Hopefully this will go pretty quick. And there it is. And now we can see that if we close in here, down to these two, we can see the mesh is really far away from the particles. That's telling me that my radius is way too big. So I'm going to come down and I'm going to go to 0.01, and I'm going to build it again. And now we've got a very ugly mesh, and this is because our polygon size is also way too big. But now we can bring that down, and let's go to 0.03 on our mesh, and we'll try another one. There we go. Now we're starting to get ballpark of where we want to get to, because we're starting to see that the mesh is much, much closer to our particles, and it's not making one ginormous shape anymore. So let's go ahead and maybe drop our polygon size down to 0.02, build it again. There we go. We're getting nicer, smoother geometry. But we're still a little bit far away from the edges of our particles. And I think the key to really nice liquid is having a very tight mesh to your particles. So let's go down to 0.0008 and we'll build again. That's better. That's looking much better. The edges of the mesh are right on top of the particles. So if we were to go ahead and render this out, it wouldn't look bad, but it would just look like a bunch of little dots, maybe something you could get out of a different program, or one that just simulates particles, not really liquids. We want to get a little bit of a different look. So I'm going to come down to the filters and I'm going to turn it on. And I'm going to drop my relaxation. Actually, I'm going to leave the relaxation where it is for the moment and just go ahead and hit the preview, just to show you what happens when there's way too much relaxation. So I'm going to take my particles and I'm going to go to the display and just turn them off for a moment. And you can see we have these weird spider's web meshy kind of things happening. And that is what happens when you have way too much relaxation. You just get this really kind of crazy pattern. And that can be good for things, but this does not look like liquid. And it's usually the sign that somebody had way too much relaxation going with their simulation and build. So let's go ahead and drop that down to maybe 0.04. And we'll build again. And that's getting better, but it's still a little too high for my taste. But we're starting to get these really nice stringy bits. We're getting a lot of little particles. We're just getting more interesting shapes now. So maybe relaxation 0.03. And I'll hit build one more time. There we go. That's starting to look like more of a liquid to me. And it's looking really good in these frames. And if I look from where maybe my close-up will be, you know, we definitely have some nice solid parts. We've got a lot of little pieces. There's little collections. Just, you know, I think it's a very interesting look we've got going. But we have to check this in more than one frame. Just because it's going to look good here doesn't mean it's going to look good here at the beginning. So I'm going to come back earlier in the simulation, do a build, make sure that it's still looking good here, which I think it does. And I'm going to go ahead and bring it out towards the end. And go ahead and build it again. And I just want to check it from a few frames within the range to make sure that it's going to look good throughout the whole shot. And that's looking pretty good because I do want it to break up. I do want it to kind of dissipate as it gets flung, as the particles get pulled further and further apart. I do want that to happen. So that's looking pretty good. Let's check from the middle. And yeah, that's looking about right to me. So let's go ahead, rewind to the beginning, and I'm going to come up to the top and click my Build Mesh button. And I want to make sure that I have my mesh highlighted when I hit it. So I'm going to click on the Build Mesh, and it should run through fairly quickly. No frame is going to take much longer than the ones we saw. So I'm going to let this run through, and then we're going to give it another look before we bring it into the 3D world. All right, I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so we're back one more time, and let's take a look at a preview of the mesh. And hopefully we'll get a more clear idea of what this is really going to look like. Whereas before we just saw this giant mass of particles, now we can see a little clearer that it's going to be a big burst, and then everything's going to kind of pull apart and atomize, which is something I think will look really nice for a big blood burst. So let's go ahead and take one more look at something before we move on. And that is to take a look at this smooth shaded. And I just want to make sure that we don't have a lumpy kind of fluid, which we kind of have here. See how we may have gone too far with our meshing and getting it so tight that now there's no cohesion to it. And that's not going to look good in a render. So what I need to do is come back, and I want to go ahead, increase my blend factor a little bit. And the blend factor and the radius are kind of a yin and yang. You can push them in opposite directions or in the same direction to kind of help achieve the look you're looking for. So I'm going to go ahead, click on my build again. And see if we can get a little more cohesion here. We're starting to see it. That's a little better. I'm going to maybe go up to 120, build it again. There we go. That's more of what I want to see. I want to see a little more of a mass there. I want to see that when the particles are close together, when the mesh is more dense, it becomes more of a solid, just like a liquid would. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead, bring this back, and I'm going to build it out one more time. And when we come back, we'll be over in the 3D application. Okay, welcome back. We are in Cinema 4D, and we're going to bring in our RealFlow mesh, give it a little shading, give it some light, and see how the render looks. So to bring it in, you go into your plugins menu, and you'll see that there is a RealFlow mesh importer. And you click on that, and then you click on the file path, and then you just want to navigate to where your RealFlow is going to be located. For me, that is going to be in projects, RealFlow tests, and Halloween Blood. And if we look in the hierarchy here, we've got a images, meshes, objects, particles preview. Inside particles, this is where you're going to find all of the raw particles. So if you wanted to bring these into something like Krakatoa, this is what you would be grabbing. But we want the mesh layers. So we're going to go into our meshes, we're going to click on the file name, and we should have it in here, and there it is. So we've got it here in Cinema now. So I can go ahead and just right now I can take a quick preview, and I can see that we have a lot of nice detail there. Looks really, really good. But unless we're doing something with aliens, it's probably not going to be a grayish blood that we're after. I think we're going to want to do something more in the reds. So I'm just going to create a new material. I'm going to come down to its illumination. I'm going to change it over to Ordinaire. And that's going to give me kind of a more soft, a little more organic look. And I'm going to come into color, and I'm just going to go red, red, red. We're doing blood. There's no reason it should be anything but red. There we go. So probably a little too specular. So I'm going to bring that down. And maybe I'll bring down the color a little bit, kind of get it more into what a real blood color might be, rather than neon red. There we go. That's starting to look interesting. And let's bring down that specularity just a little more. Let's get it subtle. There we go. That's starting to look nice. I think for the sake of the tutorial, I'll bring the color back up a little bit, a little brighter than what I would normally do. There we go. That's looking really good. And with something like this, you just kind of light it the same way you would light anything else in your scene. If you're doing this for a specific shot, you would want to try to match that lighting. For this one, as an example, I'm just going to kind of bring out a bit of a key here. And I'll bring that light over. Maybe bring it up a little higher and give it a little more punch. And then maybe one more light. Maybe out into the back here and drop it down as a little fill. There we go. So there we go. That's looking really nice. I think that's very interesting. So if we're using this as a close-up, let's bring it over here to about where the impact zone is. Just kind of close it up there. And we'll go ahead and make a preview. And we'll just do a hardware preview at 960, 24 frames, and say OK. All right. So we got our preview. Let's take a look. There we go. So if you imagine somebody's getting a giant axe chopped right in front of camera, or maybe they're getting shot and this big blood burst comes out, I think we've got something fairly fun for our little shot. And the nice thing about making an asset like this is you've just got complete control over it now. So if I wanted to change angles, if I wanted to change the speed of it, if I want to change the render size of it, I am not limited to anything except what I want it to do. You know, like here we can now have the blood just tidal wave on over us if that's what we want. You know, just something like this gives you the ability to do just Quentin Tarantino-esque amounts of blood. So I think that's going to bring us to the end for this week. I hope you've learned something that you can use in your work. And if you have any questions, you can always hit me up on either Twitter or Facebook or in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. Go and create.